Hello there. It's nearing Halloween, and for some of us that means it's the time for consuming horror media. Today I would like to talk about my favorite horror game, Amnesia: The Dark Descent. This is how the game opens, with a darkly lit corridor and an unpleasant drone. I find this opening creepy as all heck. It doesn't take very much to scare people. For another example, you could look at the credits sequence for the movie Psycho. If neither of those make the hair on your neck stand up, there's something a little bit wrong with you. Because it's so easy to scare people, I think that a lot of these video essays are missing the point when they talk about what makes a game scary. Something that I think people should talk about, and which receives very little discussion, is the ways in which game designers or filmmakers can and should limit the scariness of their particular media. Now, what do I mean by that? Surely that defeats the whole purpose of horror media. Well, horror media's got a bit of a problem in that, by its very nature, it's quite unpleasant to consume. As a result of this, people are very unlikely to pick up a piece of horror media, and of those that do, a much smaller percentage are likely to see it through to the end. Now, if you don't engage very much with a piece of media, how likely are you to recommend it to your friends? Something that has contributed, I believe, to the success of Amnesia and frictional games is the fact that they have intentionally limited the horror of Amnesia. And today I would like to talk about a couple of the ways that frictional games has limited the horror of Amnesia for the benefit of playability. The first of these techniques that I'd like to talk about is the use of little startles to relieve tension. The simple act of moving about a dark environment with creepy ambiance in the background builds tension. A low level of tension is fun, but if tension gets to too high a point, it becomes unbearable for the player. To relieve tension, a designer has only three options. They can present a calming environment, which removes the tension completely. They can present a genuine threat, for example, a monster attack. The drawback to this approach is that every time you present the monster to the player, it becomes a little less scary in their imagination, and they understand its systems a little bit better. The approach of presenting a little startle is a really good compromise. It relieves a little bit of the tension, but not all of it, while preserving your monsters for more important encounters. The next thing I'd like to talk about is the way that sound design ties into the monster encounters. The ambiance and the background music give you a pretty good idea at any given time of the current level of danger. For example, I can tell just from listening to the background noise that I'm in a dangerous place, but I'm not in any immediate danger. Let's go over what just happened. First, I approached the door, then a roar, giving me ample time to run away and hide before the monster even appears. I duck into a hidey hole, and the soundtrack changes from eerie ambiance to pulsating danger as the monster searches for me. Eventually, the soundtrack changes back to ambiance, and I know that the monster, while still out there, is no longer looking for me. Now, most players won't notice this on their first time through the game, but they will pick up on it subconsciously. If the developers hadn't done this, a player, upon being scared into hiding by a monster, would just remain there indefinitely. The changing background music subconsciously tells the player that it's safe to come out now, just be careful. The next thing that I'd like to talk about is the way that encounters are designed. Most encounters in Amnesia run along these lines. First, the player hears something dangerous, giving a brief window to take the necessary action. Then the danger presents itself. The player sits tight, trying to use the audio to figure out what the monster's doing, how close it is, etc. If the player did his job right, the monster will eventually complete his little task and wander off to some other area. Now, you could argue that it would be scarier if the monsters simply appeared without warning, and maybe you'd be right. But in my experience, jump scares like that are the sort of thing that make people want to turn off a game and not pick it up again. Everybody hates jump scares. You could also argue that it would be much scarier if the monsters stuck around and hunted for you relentlessly, rather than performing their duty and wandering off. There's another horror game made by Frictional called Penumbra. It's more or less the same thing as Amnesia, but in a less refined state. I remember one of the encounters where a monster breaks into the room that you're looting. In this room there was a large desk, so I crouched underneath it and hid. I expected the monster to look around the room and see that there's nobody in there, and then get bored and wander off. This monster, though, he was too clever for me. He knew I was in there, so he just stood in the doorway, kept his flashlight on the desk, and waited. In retrospect, the monster's scripting was probably bugged, but I didn't know this at the time. So I just waited behind that desk, waiting for him to go, and I waited, and I waited, and I waited, and all the while I was getting more and more stressed out, because what am I supposed to do? What do they want me to do here? There's no way past him, he's blocking the door. I'll go out and I'll just get hit immediately. And I waited under that desk for, I think it was about 20 minutes. Then eventually I threw my hands up and said, to heck with this game. And it was about 2 weeks before I bothered to pick it up again. If I had anything else to play, I might not have picked it up again. Now, I don't think I've ever been more scared playing a video game than that moment. I was literally paralyzed, to the point where I decided, I can't deal with this, so I just shut it down and did something else. This is what the horror developer needs to try and avoid. You don't want to scare the player so much that they shut down. It's a fine line to walk. All it took for me was a minor scripting bug. There are two more techniques for limiting horror that I would like to talk about. The first of these is safe rooms. Now, you all know about safe rooms, so I'm not going to spend too much time on them. A safe room can just be a well-lit environment with some soothing music. There are two concerns when designing a safe room. The first is that it will reduce the tension of your game to almost nothing. Because of this, designers tend to put them immediately after some intense event like a boss fight. The other concern about safe rooms is that once you violate the sanctity of the safe room, perhaps for a very intense jump scare, safe rooms will no longer work as a means of relieving tension. The player won't trust them anymore. The final thing I want to talk about is difficulty. Amnesia is not a terribly difficult game. I think I got maybe 1 or 2 game overs throughout its whole length, which is not that many considering. If you play the game the way the developers intend, which in Amnesia's case is like a scared little child, you'll get through most of the encounters unscathed. Some people will tell you that a horror game needs to be difficult so that you feel the tension of every little situation. I disagree with this very strongly, for the simple reason that most players aren't skilled enough to get out of a difficult situation in one try. When you die in a video game, all of the tension that was built up throughout that encounter is suddenly gone just like that, and you aren't going to be scared by the same tricks because you saw them all just a few minutes ago. In addition to this, if you die more than once in the same encounter, your fear is going to be replaced very quickly by something called frustration. Now, to a horror developer, frustration is almost as bad as the player just shutting down, something to be avoided at any cost. If the game ends up being a little bit on the easy side, I say it's a fair price to pay for reducing frustration. The other side of difficulty is the consequence of failure. Some game designers feel obligated to punish the player for getting a game over, such as Dark Souls making you walk 15 minutes to try the Four Kings boss fight again. Or games like Outlast or Alien Isolation, which every time you get a game over, it subjects you to a lengthy animation of your character being disemboweled in grisly detail. Both of these do make the game more tense. You don't want to lose all that progress in Dark Souls, and you don't want to watch that animation again in Alien Isolation. What they also do is make the player want to stop playing. Amnesia makes the decision to punish the player as little as possible. There are no lengthy death animations. When you die, it only sets you back about a minute and gives you a little hint. Another thing it does when you die is that it will remove or alter certain elements of the challenge. Something I've noticed it do in my various playthroughs is that sometimes if you die during a multi-enemy encounter, it will remove one of the enemies for the future attempt. Other things it will do is it will make the enemies in the room move slower, or it'll make them start further away. You could say that this is rewarding the player for dying, but it's all in service of reducing the player frustration and the likelihood of them putting the game down. Well, I believe I've said my piece. I hope I was halfway coherent. If you haven't played Amnesia, why not give it a try this season? It's a really well-designed game. Bye-bye.